There are sounds in the grim darkness of the far future that freeze the blood of even the most hardened warriors. The shriek of a chaos warband charging across blasted Earth, the howl of Xenos beasts emerging from shadow, the thunder of orbital bombardment reducing entire cities to ash and memory. But there is another sound, one that carries a different kind of terror. It is the sound of ceramite footfalls, each step weighing as much as a fully armored space marine. Shaking the ground with mechanical precision, it is the whir of servo motors straining against tons of blessed steel and ancient machinery. It is the crackling Vox transmission that emerges from speakers corroded by centuries of service, carrying a voice that is no longer quite human, but not yet fully machine. It is the sound of a dreadnought awakening to war. In the vast Gothic horror of the 41st millennium, where humanity fights an endless battle for survival against enemies too numerous to count, the dreadnoughts stand as both symbols of ultimate sacrifice and monuments to the grim necessity of eternal warfare. These towering war machines, standing between 3 and 6 meters tall depending on their pattern, are not mere weapons platforms or automated killing machines. They are tombs. Living tombs that house the broken, dying remnants of warriors too valuable to lose, too skilled to let pass into the Emperor's peace. Within their armored sarcophagi, floating in amniotic fluids that preserve what little organic matter remains, the pilots of these war engines exist in a state that defies easy categorization. They are neither fully alive nor completely dead. They are consciousness without body, thought without sensation. Warriors who have traded their humanity for the ability to serve the Imperium for centuries, or even millennia beyond their natural span. But the true horror of their existence is not revealed in how they fight for the Imperium, crushing Xenos hordes and heretical armies beneath their power fists while their assault cannons roar defiance at the enemies of mankind. No. The deepest tragedy emerges in those terrible moments when two dreadnoughts meet on the field of battle, their weapon systems targeting each other, their ancient machine spirits recognizing patterns of movement and combat doctrine from wars fought centuries or even millennia ago. And when those two walking tombs belonged once to brothers of the same legion, warriors who fought side by side during the Great Crusade before the galaxy was torn apart by the Horus Heresy, the encounter becomes something more than mere combat. It becomes a testament to how far humanity has fallen, how completely the great dream of unity has been shattered, and how even death offers no escape from the eternal war. This is the story of what happens when two dreadnoughts from enemy legions meet. It is a story written in thunder and fire, in the grinding of ancient gears and the screaming of tortured metal. It is a story of recognition and regret, of duty that transcends even the bonds of brotherhood, and of the terrible price paid by those who can never truly die. To understand this encounter, we must first understand what these machines truly are, what horrors their pilots endure, and what it means to be trapped forever in a shell of adamantium and ceramite, watching the ages pass while your memories slowly fade like morning mist beneath a burning sun. The nature of dreadnoughts. Iron coffins and eternal vigil stand before a dreadnought on the battlefield, and you will understand why mortal soldiers flee in terror at their approach. These machines are not the sleek, graceful constructs of Xenos civilizations. They are brutal, functional, and utterly terrifying in their singular purpose. A standard Castroferum pattern dreadnought, the most common variant deployed by Space Marine chapters in the current age, stands roughly 4.5 meters tall. Its form is roughly humanoid but impossibly broad. Its torso a massive armored shell that houses not just weapons systems and power cores, but the sacred sarcophagus containing the pilot's remains. The legs are reinforced pistons capable of bearing tons of weight, allowing these war machines to stride through terrain that would bog down tracked vehicles. The arms are not arms in any human sense, but weapon mounts, each capable of bearing firepower sufficient to destroy tanks or shred entire infantry formations. But size alone does not convey the true nature of these machines. To understand a dreadnought, you must understand how it is created, and that process begins with death. Or rather, it begins with something very close to death, with injuries so catastrophic that even the superhuman physiology of a space marine cannot overcome them. Perhaps a Titan's weapon has reduced the warrior to a charred torso and a head barely clinging to life. Perhaps an orc warboss has torn away limbs and crushed the spine beyond any hope of regeneration. Perhaps exposure to the void has frozen and shattered everything below the neck, leaving only the brain and a few vital organs still capable of function. These are the warriors chosen for interment, the heroes whose deeds have been so great that their chapter masters deem them too valuable to lose, even when their bodies have been destroyed beyond all recovery. The process of becoming a dreadnought is neither quick nor painless. The dying warrior is brought to the chapter's apothecaries and tech marines, where decisions are made with cold precision about what can be salvaged and what must be removed. Everything that cannot be sustained by the life support systems of the sarcophagus is cut away. Arms, legs, organs that have been too damaged, sections of the torso that have been compromised beyond repair. What remains is placed within a sarcophagus, a coffin of blessed ceramite and adamantium that becomes the warrior's new body. Life support systems flood the chamber with amniotic fluids that preserve the organic tissue, maintaining it in a state of suspended animation. Neural interfaces are surgically implanted directly into the pilot's brain and spinal column, creating connections that will allow consciousness to flow outward into the machine's systems. The Mind Impulse Unit, that marvel of Dark Age technology that allows thought to become action without the delay of physical movement, is calibrated to the pilot's brainwaves. This process alone can take weeks or months, as tech marines carefully adjust the neural pathways until the pilot can move the dreadnought's limbs as naturally as they once moved their own flesh and blood. But this gift comes with a terrible price. The senses that once defined the warrior's existence are gone forever. They will never again feel the sun on their face or the wind in their hair. They will never taste food or smell the incense of the chapter's chapels. Touch, the most fundamental of human sensations, is replaced by pressure sensors that translate force into data streams fed directly into their consciousness. Vision becomes a feed from optical sensors, each blink of targeting data overlaying what they perceive. Sound arrives through acoustic sensors that can hear frequencies far beyond human range, but will never again capture the warmth of a brother's laughter or the subtle tones that make speech more than mere words. Every sensation is filtered through machinery, translated into something that approximates human experience but can never truly replicate it. And this is the existence they face not for years but for centuries, possibly even millennia. The sarcophagus protects them from the ravages of time that would claim an unaugmented human body within a single standard century. The life support systems can maintain their organic components almost indefinitely as long as the machinery remains functional. They have been granted a form of immortality, but it is an immortality of isolation, of sensory deprivation, of existence reduced to the narrow focus of war and the long darkness of sleep. For when dreadnoughts are not needed for battle, they are returned to their chapter's fortress monastery and placed in stasis. The process is described by those who have witnessed it as both solemn and deeply unsettling. The dreadnought is escorted to the halls where their kind rest between wars, vast chambers filled with dozens or even hundreds of sarcophagi standing in silent vigil. Tech marines perform the rituals of deactivation, their prayers to the machine spirits mixing with the mechanical hum of systems cycling down. The pilot's consciousness fades as the stasis fields activate, pulling them down into a sleep that is not true sleep, but something closer to non-existence. Time loses all meaning in this state. Days pass like seconds. Years vanish in what feels like a single heartbeat. When they are awakened again, it may have been weeks or it may have been centuries, and they will have no way of knowing which until they access their chronological data. This is the existence of every dreadnought pilot, but the specific nature of that existence varies, dramatically depending on which side of the Great Schism they serve. For those who remained loyal to the Emperor during the Horus Heresy and their successors in the chapters of the 41st Millennium, Interment in a dreadnought is considered among the highest honors a space marine can receive. For those who turned traitor and fled to the Eye of Terror, it became something very different indeed: loyalist dreadnoughts. Honored ancients and keepers of tradition walk through the halls of any loyal space marine chapter's fortress monastery, and you will eventually find yourself in the presence of their dreadnoughts. These chambers are treated as sacred spaces, shrines to heroes who refuse to let even mortal wounds end their service to the Emperor. The air smells of sacred oils and incense. The walls are covered with honor scrolls, detailing the deeds of those who rest within, and the dreadnoughts themselves stand like statues in the gloom. Their armor polished to a mirror sheen by generations of tech marines who tend to them with religious devotion. Even in their sleep, they are revered. Space marines come to pray before them, to ask for wisdom or strength, to remember that duty extends beyond death itself. When a loyal dreadnought awakens, it is through ceremony and ritual. Chaplains lead prayers asking the machine's spirit to stir. Tech marines anoint the sarcophagus with sacred unguents, while intuning the litanies of awakening. The chapter's warriors gather to bear witness as their ancient brother returns to consciousness. The first sounds to emerge from the dreadnought's vox speakers are often confused, disoriented as the pilot struggles to remember where and when they are. How long is frequently the first question asked, the voice crackling through centuries, old speakers carrying a weight that no flesh and blood throat could produce. The answer varies. Sometimes mere months have passed, sometimes centuries. In the case of Jorn the Fell-Handed, most ancient of all dreadnoughts still serving the Imperium, the answer has been 10,000 years, since he first walked as a flesh and blood warrior beside Lim Russ during the founding of the Space Wolves chapter. Jorn's existence exemplifies both the honor and the horror of the loyalist dreadnought's fate. He is revered beyond measure. When he awakens, all activity in the Fang ceases. From the newest Bloodclaw to the Great Wolf himself, every son of Russ gathers to hear him speak. His words carry the authority of one who knew the Primarch personally, who fought in the wars that created the Imperium, who has witnessed the slow decay of that great dream over 10 millennia. He is consulted on matters of strategy and honored as a living connection to the chapter's founding. Inquisitors and Grey Knights have knelt before him despite his protests, recognizing that they stand in the presence of something far more than a war machine. Yet for all this reverence, Jorn still faces the fundamental horror of dreadnought existence. Each time he awakens, more of his memories have faded. Faces of brothers he fought beside have become indistinct. Events that once carried deep emotional weight have been reduced to tactical data in his memory banks. The organic components of his brain are slowly failing, degrading over the millennia despite the best efforts of the wolf priests to preserve them. This gradual loss of self is a pattern repeated across all loyalist dreadnoughts. The venerable dreadnoughts, those who have served for multiple centuries, speak of it in terms that mix acceptance with profound sadness. They describe watching their humanity slip away by degrees, feeling themselves becoming more machine and less man with each awakening. Some fight against this process, deliberately maintaining emotional connections to their chapter and their brothers, forcing themselves to care about outcomes beyond tactical necessity. Others embrace it, reasoning that the efficiency of the machine is preferable to the pain of slowly losing everything that once made them who they were. But regardless of their individual responses, the process continues inexorably. Century by century, awakening by awakening, they become less the warriors they once were and more the weapons their chapters need them to be. The different patterns of dreadnought chassis each carry their own significance and capabilities. The Castroferrum pattern, most common in the current age, is a workhorse design that dates back to the Great Crusade, reliable, relatively easy to maintain, and capable of mounting a wide variety of weapon systems. It serves as the backbone of most chapters, dreadnought forces. The Contemptor pattern, far more ancient and sophisticated, represents technology from the height of the Great Crusade. These dreadnoughts are faster, more agile, and more heavily armed than their Castroferum cousins. But the knowledge of how to construct new ones has been largely lost. Those that remain are priceless relics, their pilots often veterans of wars 10,000 years past. The Leviathan Siege Dreadnought is a towering monster of a machine, standing over 6 meters tall and bristling with weapons capable of bringing down titans. So powerful are these war engines that piloting one requires exceptional mental discipline, as the neural load of controlling such a massive frame can overwhelm lesser minds. The newest addition to the Loyalist arsenal is the Redemptor Dreadnought, created for the Primaris Space Marines, who emerged from Belisarius Caul's laboratories during the Indomitus Crusade. These machines represent a disturbing evolution of dreadnought technology. They are more powerful than the standard Castroferum, armed with plasma incinerators and Gatling cannons capable of unprecedented destruction. But they come with a terrible hidden cost. The neural interface burns through the pilot's organic brain tissue at an accelerated rate. A warrior interred in a Redemptor Dreadnought may have only a few centuries of service before their consciousness degrades beyond recovery, whereas a pilot in a standard dreadnought might serve for 10,000 years or more. This has led to whispered debates within some chapters about whether the Redemptor represents a betrayal of the principles that made dreadnought interment an honor, rather than simply another way to extract maximum utility from a dying warrior. Yet, despite the horror of their existence, despite the slow erosion of their humanity, and the long centuries of darkness between battles, Loyalist dreadnoughts are treated with genuine reverence by their chapters. They are not just weapons to be deployed and discarded. They are mentors, advisors, and living links to the chapter's history. Their wisdom is sought by chapter masters making strategic decisions. Their presence in battle inspires younger Marines to acts of heroism, knowing that they fight beside warriors who have served for longer than most worlds have been part of the Imperium. When a Loyalist dreadnought falls in battle, their chapter fights with desperate fury to recover the armored sarcophagus, knowing that within lies not just valuable gene, seed, but a piece of their chapter's soul. The fallen pilot will be laid to rest with full honors, their name added to the rolls of the honored dead, their deeds remembered in the sagas and battle songs that keep the chapter's history alive. This treatment stands in stark contrast to the fate of those dreadnoughts who serve the traitor legions. Chaos Dreadnoughts. The cursed and the damned in the eye of terror, and across the broken domains of the traitor legions, dreadnoughts are viewed with a mixture of fear and pity. They are not honored ancients or revered warriors. They are prisoners, cursed souls trapped in metal shells, their torment extending through centuries of suffering that would drive most beings to complete madness. The schism of the Horus heresy did not just divide the Space Marine legions into loyalist and traitor. It fundamentally transformed what it meant to be a dreadnought on the side that fled to the warp. Everything that made internment an honor in the loyal chapters became a source of additional suffering for those who serve chaos. The transformation began during the flight to the Eye of Terror itself. As the traitor legions retreated from their defeat, they brought their dreadnoughts with them. But they did not bring the infrastructure and knowledge needed to properly maintain them. The tech marines who had tended these machines with religious devotion were scattered, killed in the fighting, or had turned their efforts to darker pursuits. The manufactorums that could produce replacement parts were lost or destroyed. Most critically, the stasis tombs that allowed loyalist dreadnoughts to sleep peacefully between battles were either left behind or fell into disrepair during the chaotic years after the heresy. Without these systems, Chaos dreadnought pilots faced a horror beyond imagination. They remained conscious, trapped in their sarcophagi with no ability to move. No sensation beyond the constant feed of data from non-functional sensors. They experienced time in its full, crushing weight. Days became weeks, became months, became years, became centuries, each moment stretching out in agonizing clarity. The warp did not help. Exposure to the malevolent energies of chaos, sustained over centuries, began to warp both the machines and the pilots within them. The metal of their hulls took on organic properties, ceramite flowing like flesh, adamantium growing spines and protrusions that served no tactical purpose. The pilots themselves began to merge with their machines in ways that went far beyond the intended neural interface. Their consciousness spread through the Dreadnought systems like an infection, their thoughts becoming one with the machine spirit until it became impossible to say where the warrior ended and the weapon began. Many descended into complete madness, their minds fragmenting under the combined weight of isolation, warp corruption, and the sheer length of their imprisonment. This degradation led to the emergence of Hellbrutes, the most common form of Chaos Dreadnought in the first Millennium. These twisted mockeries of their Imperial counterparts are created when a Dreadnought's fusion with its chassis becomes complete. The sarcophagus opens like a grotesque flower, revealing flesh that has become machine and machine that has become flesh. Demonic entities may inhabit portions of the structure, their malevolent consciousness mixing with the pilot's fragmenting mind. The resulting hybrid is completely insane, driven by an all-consuming need to kill and destroy anything in its path. On the battlefield, Hellbrutes fight with berserk fury, their weapon fire wild and uncontrolled, their close combat attacks driven more by rage than tactical consideration. They are as likely to attack their own allies as the enemy if their madness overwhelms what little control their masters have established. Because of this unreliability and the torment it represents, internment in a dreadnought is not considered an honor among the traitor legions. It is a punishment. Chaos Lords use it as a tool of control, threatening warriors who displease them with the prospect of being sealed into a sarcophagus and left conscious for centuries. Some legions have refined this cruelty to an art form. The Emperor's children, devoted to Slaanesh, keep their dreadnought pilots in a drugged haze, feeding them sensations through their neural interfaces that range from ecstasy to agony, ensuring that their consciousness never achieves the mercy of numbness. The World Eaters, servants of Khorne, leave their dreadnought pilots fully aware but disconnected from their machines between battles, forcing them to experience centuries of sensory deprivation before being reconnected to their chassis and unleashed in uncontrollable fury. The Word-Bearers created the Maragail-tainted dreadnought, the first Chaos dreadnought to be completely corrupted by demonic possession. Its pilot was one of the Gael Vorbak, warriors who had voluntarily merged with demonic entities, and that fusion extended to the dreadnought chassis itself, creating a war machine that exists partially in real space and partially in the warp. Yet not all Chaos dreadnoughts have succumbed to complete madness. The Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts, ancient and sophisticated machines that the traitor legions prize above all others, are maintained with far greater care than lesser chassis. The warriors interred within them are typically Chaos Lords or champions of such power that even their masters dare not risk losing them to the degradation that claims lesser pilots. These Contemptors retain much of their tactical acumen and mental coherence, though centuries of warp exposure have inevitably twisted them in ways both subtle and profound. They fight with cold precision rather than berserk rage, employing the skills and knowledge accumulated over millennia of warfare. Some even retain enough of their original personality to communicate coherently with their allies, offering tactical advice or insights drawn from battles fought before the current generation of Chaos Space Marines was even born. The Ferrum Infernus designation applies to Chaos dreadnoughts of the Castroferrum pattern that have not yet mutated into Hellbrutes. These war machines represent a middle ground between the coherence of the Contemptor and the complete madness of the Hellbrute. Their pilots vary widely in mental state. Some are highly experienced veterans who have managed to resist the worst effects of warp corruption through sheer force of will or the favor of their patron deity. Others have begun the descent into madness, but retain enough control to function in battle. The Emperor's children deploy sonic dreadnoughts, variants armed with massive versions of the sonic weaponry used by their noise marines. Only noise marines willing to sacrifice all remaining physical sensation upon interment can be trusted to pilot these machines without succumbing to instability. Their complete devotion to Slaanesh paradoxically granting them a measure of protection against the worst aspects of the cursed existence. The World Eaters field berserker dreadnoughts, war machines driven by an overwhelming compulsion to close with the enemy and tear them apart in close combat. These dreadnoughts are equipped with pairs of massive close combat weapons, chain fists that can shred through armor plating, or power fists crackling with energy sufficient to pulverize ceramite. Their pilots have given themselves completely to Khorne's rage, and while this makes them formidable in melee combat, it also renders them almost uncontrollable. They must be kept in heavy restraints between battles. Bound with chains blessed by the Dark Mechanicum, their Vox systems disabled to prevent their constant screaming from demoralizing nearby warriors. When released for battle, they charge forward with single-minded fury, seeking the closest enemy and attempting to destroy it with their bare metal hands before moving on to the next target. For all Chaos Dreadnought pilots, regardless of their specific variant or the degree of corruption they have suffered, existence is fundamentally defined by torment. They cannot die. They cannot escape. The closest thing to mercy they can hope for is complete destruction in battle. Their sarcophagus breached, and their organic remains finally released from the prison that has held them for so long. Some actively seek this end, throwing themselves into combat with reckless abandon, hoping that each battle will be their last. Others have embraced their suffering, allowing it to fuel the hatred that drives them forward, viewing their pain as proof of their dedication to the dark gods. Still others have simply stopped thinking about it at all, their consciousness retreating into corners of their minds, where the horror cannot reach, emerging only when the neural interfaces flood their awareness with the data of active combat. This is the existence of Chaos Dreadnoughts, not honored, not revered, cursed to an eternity of suffering that makes the loyalist Dreadnought's slow loss of humanity seem almost merciful by comparison. Weapons and combat capabilities. The arsenal of the ancients. To understand what happens when two dreadnoughts meet in battle, we must first understand the terrible weapons they bring to that encounter. These are not the small arms carried by individual space marines, powerful though those weapons may be. Dreadnoughts are equipped with armaments designed to destroy vehicles, shred infantry formations, and engage targets that would be beyond the capability of unaugmented warriors to threaten. The standard configuration for most dreadnoughts consists of a ranged weapon on one arm and a close combat weapon on the other. Though many variants exist that mount dual ranged weapons or dual close combat weapons, depending on their intended tactical role. The assault cannon is perhaps the most iconic dreadnought weapon, a rotary autocannon that fires mass, reactive shells at a rate of hundreds per minute. The sound it makes when firing is distinctive, a deep thunderous roar that can be heard across entire battlefields. Each shell is capable of penetrating light armor and detonating inside the target, making the assault cannon devastatingly effective against infantry and light vehicles. When a dreadnought opens fire with its assault cannon, entire squads can be reduced to red mist and scattered body parts in seconds. The weapon's only limitation is its relatively short effective range compared to other heavy weapons. But dreadnoughts compensate for this by advancing relentlessly toward their targets, laying down suppressive fire as they close the distance. Lascannons provide long-range anti-armor capability. These directed energy weapons fire beams of coherent light hot enough to punch through the heaviest armor plating. Twin-linked lascannon configurations, mounting two of these weapons on a single arm, can threaten even super heavy tanks and light titans. The visual effect of a lascannon firing is spectacular. Brilliant lances of ruby or emerald light streaking across the battlefield and impacting with explosive force as the superheated air around the beam expands violently. Against other dreadnoughts, lascannons are particularly effective, their armor penetrating capability sufficient to breach even the reinforced sarcophagus that houses the pilot. Plasma cannons sacrifice some of the lascannon's armor penetration for increased versatility and area effect. These weapons fire superheated plasma contained within magnetic fields, creating projectiles that explode on impact with the force of miniature suns. The temperature of the plasma is sufficient to reduce flesh to ash and melt through ceramite armor. Plasma weapons are notoriously temperamental, prone to catastrophic failure if not properly maintained, but in the hands of a dreadnought with centuries of experience, they become precision instruments of destruction. The sight of a plasma cannon charging up is distinctive, the weapon beginning to glow with an inner light that increases in intensity until it releases its deadly payload in a blue-white stream of barely contained stellar fury. Melter specialize in close range armor destruction. These weapons use focused microwave radiation to superheat and liquefy any material they touch. Against vehicles and hardened structures, melters are nearly unstoppable, capable of melting through reinforced bunkers or cutting through tank armor like a blowtorch through wax. The effective range is limited, but dreadnoughts often mount melters on their close combat arms, allowing them to soften up heavily armored targets before engaging in melee. The visual and thermal signature of a melter is unmistakable, the air around the weapon shimmering with heat distortion as it fires, the target beginning to glow red, then orange, then white before liquefying entirely. Missile launchers provide flexible fire support capability. These weapons can fire a variety of munitions depending on the tactical situation, from armor-piercing Kraken missiles to fragmenting anti-personnel warheads to specialized rounds designed to engage aircraft or release clouds of toxic gas. Dreadnoughts mounting missile launchers can adapt their fire to whatever targets present themselves, making them valuable assets in fluid combat situations where the nature of the threat may change rapidly. The Hellfire variant Dreadnought configuration mounts both a missile launcher and a las cannon, sacrificing close combat capability entirely for maximum ranged firepower. On the close combat side, the Dreadnought Power Fist is the most common weapon. These massive appendages are encased in disruption fields that allow them to punch through armor with devastating effect. A blow from a Dreadnought Power Fist can crush a Space Marine in full power armor flat, reduce vehicles to scrap metal, or cave in the reinforced walls of bunkers and fortifications. The Power Fist typically includes an integrated weapon, either a storm bolter for suppressive fire or a heavy flamer for clearing infantry from defensive positions. The Mark IV pattern Power Fist features bladed fingers that can slash and tear in addition to crushing, making it particularly effective against softer targets. Chain Fists represent a fusion of the Power Fist's crushing power with the cutting ability of a chainsaw. The entire striking surface of the fist is covered with adamantium, toothed chains that rotate at tremendous speed, allowing the weapon to grind through armor while the disruption field weakens molecular bonds. Chain fists are particularly favored for siege warfare, where the ability to cut through reinforced walls and blast doors is invaluable. The sound of a chain fist in operation is nightmarish. The shrieking of the chains mixing with the grinding of metal and the wet tearing sounds as it encounters organic targets. Siege equipment takes close combat capability to specialized extremes. The assault drill features 3 rotating drill bits capable of grinding through rockcrete, steel, and ceramite with equal ease. An integrated heavy flamer allows the dreadnought to send jets of promethium through any opening the drill creates, turning breached bunkers and armored vehicles into crematoriums for anyone inside. The seismic hammer delivers kinetic shocks that can shatter armor and pulverize anything beneath it, supplemented by an underslung melter that turns already weakened targets into molten slag. The psychological impact of these weapons cannot be overstated. When a dreadnought opens fire, the battlefield transforms. The sound of its weapons drowns out all other noise. The ground shakes with each footfall. The air itself seems to vibrate with released energy. Infantry who moments before fought with disciplined courage find themselves frozen in terror as tons of armor and fury bear down on them. Even other Space Marines, conditioned to know no fear, feel a primal response to the sight of a dreadnought in full combat mode. This psychological effect is amplified when the dreadnought bears the colors and heraldry of a chapter or legion known for particular brutality or skill in combat. In terms of durability, Dreadnoughts are among the toughest units on the battlefield. Their armor is typically 12 to 13 units of thickness on the front, roughly equivalent to that of a medium battle tank. The sarcophagus itself is even more heavily armored, designed to protect the pilot even if the rest of the Dreadnought's systems are destroyed. Advanced variants like the Contemptor pattern feature atomantic shielding, energy fields that can deflect or absorb incoming fire before it even reaches the physical armor. Leviathan Siege Dreadnoughts are so heavily armored that they can withstand direct hits from Titan weapons and continue fighting. Their massive frames designed to operate in the absolute worst combat environments imaginable. The engineering that goes into creating this level of protection is a marvel of Dark Age technology that the Mechanicus struggles to replicate in the current era. Each layer of armor serves multiple purposes. The outermost layer is ablative, designed to vaporize or shear away when struck by energy weapons, carrying heat away from the underlying structure. Beneath this is the primary ceramite plating, compressed and treated through processes that take months to complete. Under that lies adamantium mesh, woven in patterns that distribute kinetic energy across the entire frame rather than allowing it to concentrate at the point of impact. The innermost layer, protecting the sarcophagus itself, is a specialized alloy whose composition is a closely guarded secret of each chapter's tech marines, often incorporating blessed components and relics from the chapter's founding. This armor can take incredible punishment. Bolter rounds that would punch through power armor simply create craters on a Dreadnought surface. Plasma fire that would reduce infantry to ash merely scorches and pits the ceramite. Even melter weapons, designed specifically to defeat heavy armor, must sustain fire on a single point to breach a Dreadnought's protection. The psychological effect of this durability cannot be overstated. When enemy forces watch their heaviest weapons impact a Dreadnought without apparent effect, when they see it continue advancing through fire that would stop a tank formation, morale crumbles, infantry break and run, vehicle crews abandon their posts. Even other Space Marines feel a moment of doubt when facing a Dreadnought that seems immune to their weapons. This combination of firepower, armor, and psychological impact makes Dreadnoughts exceptionally valuable on the battlefield. They can serve as heavy infantry support, advancing alongside tactical squads and providing covering fire. They can function as breakthrough units, punching holes in enemy lines through which other forces can exploit. They can hold defensive positions that would be untenable for infantry, their durability allowing them to weather assaults that would overwhelm lighter units. And in specialized roles, they can serve as Titan hunters, engaging the god machines of the Adeptus Titanicus in close combat, where their smaller size becomes an advantage. But all of this capability, all of this destructive potential, takes on a different character when the target is not an enemy from outside the Imperium, but another Dreadnought. Another warrior who was once a Space Marine, who underwent the same transformation, who carries the same burden of eternal service. When two such beings meet on the battlefield, especially when they belonged once to the same legion, before the Horus heresy tore that brotherhood apart, the encounter becomes something that transcends mere tactical calculation. The psychology of the entombed, fading memories, and lost humanity. Before we can understand what passes between two Dreadnoughts from enemy legions when they meet in combat, we must delve deeper into the psychology of those who pilot these war machines. The physical transformation from flesh and blood warrior to cybernetic combat walker is dramatic. But the psychological transformation that occurs over centuries of service is in many ways more profound and more terrible. To be entombed in a Dreadnought is to begin a process of gradual dissolution, a slow fading of everything that once defined you as an individual human being. Even a transhuman Space Marine, the process begins immediately upon awakening for the first time in the sarcophagus. The newly interned warrior expects, on some level, to see the world as they once did. But the visual feed from optical sensors is not sight. It carries no peripheral vision, no subtle motion tracking. No automatic focusing that the human eye performs unconsciously thousands of times per day. Instead, there are targeting reticles, threat assessments, range calculations, and tactical overlays. The data is overwhelming, and it takes months of training before the pilot can pass this information without conscious effort. Sound arrives through acoustic sensors calibrated to detect enemy movements and weapon fire rather than the nuances of human speech. Touch is reduced to pressure readings and structural integrity reports. The ability to sense temperature, pain, the position of limbs in space, all of it is gone, replaced by diagnostic readouts and system status notifications. This sensory replacement creates a fundamental disconnect from human experience. A dreadnought pilot cannot feel the wind or the rain. They cannot smell the incense in the chapter's chapel or taste the ceremonial wine during sacred rituals. They cannot feel the handshake of a brother or the weight of a bolter in hands they no longer possess. Everything is mediated through machinery, filtered through systems that translate analog experience into digital data. The effect is disorienting and isolating in ways that most people cannot imagine. Humans are sensory beings. We understand the world through our senses and our emotional responses to sensory input. Strip that away. Replace it with data feeds and mechanical approximations, and what remains is something that struggles to maintain its connection to humanity. The isolation is compounded by the sleep cycles. When a dreadnought is placed in stasis between battles, the pilot does not experience the passage of time. There are no dreams, no gradual awareness of the approach of morning, no ability to track the days and weeks through the subtle changes in their surroundings. Instead, there is darkness and nothingness, and then there is the sudden shock of awakening with no idea how long has passed. Years, centuries. The chronological data provides numbers, but numbers cannot convey the weight of time that has been lost. Imagine falling asleep and waking up to discover that everyone you knew is dead, that the political situation has changed beyond recognition, that wars you never heard of have been fought and concluded, that the very language has evolved in ways that make conversations with the newly inducted seem alien. This temporal dislocation creates profound psychological stress. Dreadnought pilots describe their lives as a series of discontinuous moments separated by vast empty spaces. They are awake for a battle, perhaps for weeks or months of campaigning, and then they sleep again. Each awakening is a reset, a need to reorient and remember who and where they are. Over time, the awakenings begin to blur together. Was that battle fought last year or last century? Was that brother they remember speaking with still alive, or had he fallen 500 years ago? Memory becomes unreliable, events running together or vanishing entirely. The organic brain, even one augmented with space marine enhancements, was never designed to maintain clear recollections across spans of time measured in millennia. This leads to the gradual loss of personal memory that defines the later centuries of a dreadnought pilot's existence. The process is not sudden or dramatic. It is a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone. First, minor details fade. The exact words spoken during a particular conversation, the precise formation used in a specific battle, the name of a world where they once fought. Then more significant memories begin to soften and lose clarity. Faces become less distinct. Events that once carried deep emotional weight become cold historical facts. The organic components of the brain are deteriorating, protected but not immortalized by the life support systems. Neurons die and are not replaced. Synaptic connections weaken. The capacity for new memory formation diminishes. Some pilots fight against this process with every fiber of their remaining consciousness. They rehearse their personal histories, going over the same stories again and again to keep them fresh. They insist on being present for chapter ceremonies and rituals, forcing themselves to maintain connections to the living community of their battle brothers. They engage in conversation whenever possible, asking about current events, learning the names of newly inducted Marines, trying to keep their minds active and engaged. This struggle can slow the process but cannot stop it. Biology has limits, and even space marine biology cannot escape the basic laws of cellular decay. When extended across spans of time, for which it was never designed. Others take a different approach. They embrace the fading of their humanity, reasoning that the loss of emotional connection and personal memory is a price worth paying for the increased tactical efficiency that comes with thinking more like a machine than a man. These pilots speak in clipped, precise language, focusing entirely on mission objectives and strategic considerations. They show little interest in the personal lives of their battle brothers, viewing such matters as distractions from their true purpose. They are weapons, they reason, and weapons need not remember what it felt like to laugh or grieve or hope. This approach can be effective in purely military terms. These dreadnoughts fight with cold precision, never hesitating, never second-guessing, executing tactical plans with mechanical perfection. But they also lose something essential. They become what the mechanicus would call a perfect fusion of flesh and machine. But in doing so, they sacrifice the human element that makes Space Marines more than mere soldiers. The difference in philosophy between these two approaches reveals a fundamental question that haunts all dreadnought pilots. What is the self when body and sensation are gone? If memories fade and emotions diminish, what remains? The answer varies from pilot to pilot. Some conclude that they are essentially dead, that what continues in the sarcophagus is merely an echo of who they were, a ghost operating a machine. Others insist that consciousness and will constitute the essence of self. That as long as they can think and choose, they remain the warriors they always were. Still others acknowledge that they have become something new. Neither the Space Marines they were nor purely machines, but some hybrid form that defies easy categorization. This psychological landscape is further complicated by the extreme differences between loyalist and chaos dreadnought pilots. Loyalist pilots have the support structure of their chapters, the reverence of their brothers, the periods of merciful sleep. They deteriorate slowly, over centuries or millennia, and they do so surrounded by honor and respect. Chaos dreadnought pilots have none of these things. Their descent into madness is accelerated by constant consciousness, warp corruption, and the knowledge that they are viewed not as honored ancients, but as cursed weapons to be used and discarded. Where a loyalist pilot might retain coherent thought and memory for 5 or 10,000 years, a chaos pilot might lose all semblance of sanity within a few centuries. The exceptions, those rare chaos dreadnoughts who maintain mental cohesion, do so through incredible force of will or the favor of their dark patrons. And even they bear scars that their loyalist counterparts never experience. Understanding this psychological landscape is essential to understanding what happens when two dreadnoughts from enemy legions meet. These are not simply war machines targeting each other. They are conscious beings with memories, emotions, and histories that may extend back to a time before the galaxy was torn apart by civil war. When their optical sensors lock onto each other across the battlefield, when their targeting systems identify the colors and heraldry of a legion they once called brother, the encounter becomes laden with meaning that transcends tactical considerations. When brothers become enemies, the Horus Heresy and its aftermath. The Horus Heresy represents the single greatest catastrophe in human history, a schism so profound that the Imperium has never recovered from it, even 10,000 years later. What began as Warmaster Horus's betrayal of the Emperor cascaded into a galaxy, spanning civil war that turned half of the Space Marine Legion's traitor and brought the Imperium itself to the brink of extinction. But the strategic and political dimensions of the heresy, terrible as they were, pale in comparison to the personal tragedies that played out across 10,000 worlds as brothers who had fought together for centuries found themselves forced to kill each other in the Emperor's name or in service to darker powers. For the dreadnoughts of both sides, the heresy created a unique horror. Many of these warriors had been interned during the Great Crusade, serving their legions for decades or even a century before the betrayal. They had fought beside their brothers through countless campaigns, forming bonds that went beyond mere military camaraderie. They knew each other's combat styles, tactical preferences, even the subtle quirks that survived the translation into Vox-mediated speech. Some had been interred in their dreadnoughts alongside battle, brothers who underwent the same transformation, creating shared experiences that only other dreadnought pilots could understand. When the schism came, it split these bonds with brutal finality. The traitor legions did not turn as unified blocks, each legion, each chapter within a legion. Even individual companies and squads were divided between those who followed their primarchs into damnation and those who remained loyal to the Emperor. This created scenarios where dreadnoughts who had served together found themselves on opposite sides of an ideological divide so vast that reconciliation was impossible. The loyalist pilots watched in horror as brothers they had known for decades or centuries embraced the very powers they had spent their lives fighting against. The traitor pilots felt betrayed by those who they saw as clinging to a false ideal, refusing to acknowledge what they viewed as the Emperor's true nature. The battles at Istvan III and Istvan V encapsulate this tragedy. On Istvan II, the War Master engineered the purging of loyalist elements from the traitor legions, ordering virus bombing of an entire world to eliminate those space marines who would not follow him into treason. Among the defenders was ancient Rylanor of the Emperor's Children, a contemptor dreadnought who had served his legion with distinction since the early years of the Great Crusade. Rylanor represented everything the Emperor's Children had once been before their fall to Slanesh honor, duty, martial perfection in service to the Emperor rather than personal excess. When his own legion brothers turned traitor, when the beautiful ideals they had once embodied became twisted into grotesque pursuit of sensation and perfection at any cost, Rylanor refused to follow. The fighting on Istvan III was brutal and personal. Space Marines who had trained together, fought together, bled together, now tore each other apart with a fury born of betrayal. Dreadnoughts played crucial roles in this battle. Their firepower and durability made them linchpins of defensive positions, but more than that, their presence served as rallying points for loyalist forces. To see ancient Rylanor standing defiant against the traitors, his weapons blazing, his vox speakers broadcasting his refusal to bend knee to Chios, inspired the loyalist Emperor's Children to fight on even when the situation seemed hopeless. But it also meant that Rylanor faced not just any enemy, but former brothers. Warriors of his own legion who now wore the colors of corruption and served powers he had spent his entire existence fighting against. What must it have been like for Rylanor? Watching through optical sensors as Emperor's Children, dreadnoughts advanced toward his position, their hulls already beginning to show the mutations and alterations that marked their fall to Chaos. These were not strangers. These were pilots he had known, had spoken with during the long years of the Great Crusade, had served alongside in battles, whose names were already becoming legend. Did he remember their faces from before interment? Did he recall conversations held in the armories or tactical briefings? When his targeting systems locked onto them and his weapons fired, reducing former brothers to scrap and burning metal, what passed through the organic portions of his brain? Relief that he could still strike against corruption, grief at the necessity, rage at the betrayal that had brought them to this moment. We know from the accounts that survived that Rylanor did not fall at Istvan III, though he was reported destroyed multiple times. In truth, he endured, buried in the catacombs beneath the ruined cities, driven slowly mad by 10,000 years of isolation, but still clinging to his loyalty and his hatred of what his legion had become. When he finally enacted his revenge against the Daemon Primarch Fulgrim millennia later, detonating an unexploded virus bomb in a final act of defiance, it was the culmination of 10,000 years of unrelenting will and purpose. His story exemplifies the particular tragedy of dreadnought pilots caught in the heresy, how even death was denied them, how their suffering extended across inconceivable spans of time, how the bonds of brotherhood became chains of obligation to ideals that required them to destroy everything they had once held dear. The Istvan V massacre saw similar scenes repeated on an even larger scale. The drop site massacre, as it came to be known, was one of the worst betrayals in Imperial history. Loyalist legions had been sent to bring the traitors to heel, and they were reinforced by other legions they believed to be loyal. When the reinforcements revealed themselves as traitors and opened fire on their supposed allies from behind, the resulting slaughter was catastrophic. Dreadnoughts on both sides participated in this treachery. Loyalist dreadnoughts of the Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands fought desperately to hold their positions, their weapons mowing down waves of traitor infantry, while their close combat weapons crushed tanks and dreadnoughts alike. Among the loyalist dead was Cassian Dracos of the Salamanders, a dreadnought known as the Dragon Revenant. His sacrifice exemplified the impossible choices faced by dreadnought pilots during the heresy. Dracos held a critical position against overwhelming odds, knowing that each second he delayed the traitor advance gave more loyalists time to escape. His dreadnought was reduced to a burning wreck, its weapons destroyed, its armor breached in dozens of places, but still he fought on. The accounts describe him crushing traitor space marines beneath his remaining power fist, even as his sarcophagus began to fail. When rescue parties finally recovered his damaged shell from the black sands of Istvan V, they found that he had endured through sheer force of will. His organic body sustained only by the most basic life support functions, his consciousness reduced to a single burning imperative: hold the line. These stories, and countless others like them, reveal the unique burden carried by dreadnoughts during the heresy. They could not simply die in battle and be done with it. Their armored sarcophagi protected them, even when their dreadnought chassis was destroyed. They endured wounds that would kill other warriors, remaining conscious through catastrophic damage, watching as their brothers fell around them. And when they were captured by the enemy, they faced fates worse than death. Chaos Space Marines delighted in tormenting captured loyalist dreadnoughts, keeping them conscious while their warp-touched artificers mutilated the chassis, replacing sacred components with demonic technology, attempting to corrupt the pilot within through exposure to forbidden knowledge and psychic assault. The aftermath of the heresy created a galaxy where dreadnoughts who had once served in the same legion now existed on opposite sides of an unbridgeable ideological divide. Those who remained loyal to the Emperor became revered ancients in their chapters, honored for their steadfast refusal to turn traitor. Those who fled to the Eye of Terror became cursed souls, their punishment for betrayal an eternity of suffering in machines that slowly drove them mad. And both carried memories of a time before the schism, when all Space Marines were brothers united in the Great Crusade, when the future seemed bright with promise, rather than darkened by endless war and betrayal. This historical context is essential to understanding what happens when two dreadnoughts from enemy legions meet. These are not abstract enemies, defined only by their allegiance. They are individuals with histories that may extend back to before the heresy, warriors who may have fought together before they were forced to fight each other. The moment of their meeting carries all of this weight, all of this history, all of the tragedy of a brotherhood shattered beyond repair. The moment of recognition. When ancient enemies meet, picture the battlefield in the moments before the encounter. The conflict has been raging for hours or days, both sides committed to the grinding attritional warfare that defines combat in the 41st millennium. Infantry squads maneuver through the rubble of destroyed buildings, bolters chattering as they exchange fire with enemies who wear armor painted in colors that mark them as traitors or loyalists, depending on which side you serve. Tanks burn, their ammunition cooking off with secondary explosions that send shrapnel screaming through the air. The sky is choked with smoke and ash from orbital bombardment and burning promethium. Artillery shells scream overhead, detonating with earth-shaking force. It is the familiar chaos of war in this dark age, the kind of battle that has been fought on 10,000 worlds across 10,000 years. And then, across the battlefield, two massive forms begin to move toward each other. On one side, a loyalist dreadnought of the Ultramarines chapter. Its armor is painted in the traditional blue of Ultramar, though centuries of battle have left it scarred and pitted. The sarcophagus bears honor scrolls detailing campaigns fought across 700 years of service. the pilot within is ancient Castor, once a sergeant in the Second Company during the Great Crusade. Interred in his dreadnought following a desperate last stand against Orc hordes during the War for Calth Secundus. He has awakened 37 times since his interment, each time to find the galaxy changed in ways both subtle and profound, each time struggling to reconcile the memories of what was with the reality of what is. On the other side, a Chaos dreadnought of the Word-Bearers Legion. Once it bore the same pattern as the Loyalist machine, but centuries in the Eye of Terror have transformed it into something else. The armor has taken on organic qualities, ceramite flowing in patterns that suggest musculature beneath the surface. Chaos runes cover every available surface, glowing with a sickly light that seems to pulse in rhythm with something that might be a heartbeat. The pilot within is ancient Mordecai, who fought beside Lorgar during the Crusade's darkest campaigns, who was interred in his dreadnought after sustaining catastrophic wounds at Kolth when his former brothers turned on their word-bearer allies. He has not slept in 5,000 years, his consciousness maintained through warp, sustained torment, his mind fragmenting under the combined weight of corruption and endless awareness. Both dreadnoughts have been advancing through the battlefield, engaging targets of opportunity, providing fire support for their respective forces. But now their optical sensors lock onto each other. Targeting reticles flash into being, range calculations appear. Threat assessment algorithms identify the opposing dreadnought as a high-priority target. For a moment, it could be any other engagement. Two war machines about to exchange fire, their pilots preparing to bring their weapons to bear, to circle and seek advantage, to kill or be killed in the endless dance of combat. But then recognition hits. It comes through multiple channels simultaneously. The visual profile matches patterns stored in memory banks from battles fought 700 years ago. The specific gait, the way the dreadnought favors its left leg, where ancient damage was never quite fully repaired, the distinctive configuration of its weapons loadout. The tactical data is supplemented by something deeper, something that exists in the organic portions of the pilot's brains, where true memory resides rather than mere data storage. Castor knows this dreadnought. He fought beside it during the campaign to reclaim the Viridian sector. He remembers watching this same chassis stride through Orc lines, its assault cannon speaking thunder, its power fist crushing through the hull of a gargant that had killed dozens of battle brothers. He remembers the Vox transmissions, Mordecai's voice discussing tactical positions and fire lanes with the calm precision of a veteran who had seen 1,000 battles and expected to see 1,000 more. And Mordecai recognizes Castor's dreadnought just as surely. The memory is there, buried under 5,000 years of suffering and corruption, but still present. He remembers that chassis painted in ultramarine's colors, remembers fighting alongside it when the word-bearers and ultramarines were allied legions working together to bring systems into Imperial compliance. He remembers conversations held over Vox channels during the lulls in fighting, discussions about philosophy and duty, and the future of the Imperium they were building together. The recognition freezes both pilots for a microsecond that stretches into subjective eternity. Their weapon systems are charged and ready. Their targeting solutions are locked in. A single command would unleash destruction sufficient to tear the other dreadnought apart. But instead, there is a moment of hesitation, of remembering, of acknowledging what they once were to each other before the galaxy burned and brotherhood became enmity. In that frozen moment, both pilots are flooded with memories that their tactical programming attempts to suppress as irrelevant to current combat parameters. For Castor, there is a vivid flash of remembrance from the Viridian campaign. He sees himself, still flesh and blood, standing in a command tent alongside a word-bearer's chaplain who had been assigned to coordinate joint operations. That chaplain had been Mordecai before his interment, a warrior whose speeches about duty and purpose had inspired entire companies to acts of heroism. Castor remembers the sound of Mordecai's voice when it came from a human throat rather than corrupted Vox speakers, remembers tactical discussions that stretched into the night. remembers a moment of shared laughter when an orc warboss had inadvertently walked into a carefully prepared kill zone and been reduced to his component atoms before he understood his error. For Mordecai, the memories are more fragmented, corrupted by 5,000 years of consciousness without sleep and the warp's malevolent influence. But fragments remain. He remembers Castor as reliable, precise, methodical in his approach to warfare. He remembers feeling a kinship with the ultramarine sergeant that transcended the normal bonds between different legions. There had been a shared understanding that both warriors took their duties seriously, that both sought perfection in execution of their assigned roles. In another time, another universe, they might have become true friends rather than merely professional colleagues. But that time is dead, buried beneath 10,000 years of war and hatred and ideological schism. The memories serve only to highlight how far both have fallen from what they were, how completely the heresy destroyed the potential for brotherhood that had existed during the Great Crusade. Castor is the first to speak, his vox transmission cutting through the battlefield noise with the crackling authority of centuries. Mordecai, I did not know you still functioned. The Chaos Dreadnoughts response comes after a pause that suggests struggle, as if the pilot is fighting through layers of corruption and madness to remember how to form coherent speech. Castor of Ultramar, 5,000 years I have endured, 5,000 years without the mercy of sleep, 5,000 years paying the price for truths you refuse to see. Truths. You speak of corruption as truth. You who betrayed everything we built together. You who turned your weapons on brothers who trusted you. We were betrayed first? The volume of Mordecai's vox transmission spikes, feedback screaming through the speakers. Betrayed by a false emperor who claimed divinity while rejecting godhood. Betrayed by Guilliman's arrogance in thinking he could dictate how we worshipped what was worthy of worship. We saw the truth, and for that seeing, we were marked for destruction. You saw lies dressed in truth's clothing. You traded the Emperor's light for the darkness of chaos. Look at what it has made you, Mordecai. Look at what you have become. I have become unbound from the limitations of false ideals. I have embraced power beyond your understanding. And I have endured Castor. While you slept in your tomb, I have been conscious every moment, learning secrets that would shatter your sanity. I am more now than you can comprehend. You are mad. I see it in your chassis, the corruption spreading through systems that were once pure. I hear it in your voice. The fragmentation of thought that comes from too long spent in the embrace of the warp. Whatever you were, Mordecai of the word bearers, that warrior died at Kolth when you chose betrayal over duty. And whatever you are, Castor of Ultramar, is merely a ghost clinging to memories of a brotherhood that died 10,000 years ago. We are both dead, brother, dead and yet still fighting, still bound to the wheel of war, but at least I have chosen my death freely, while you remain chained to a corpse god who has not spoken in 10 millennia. The Emperor protects. He has always protected. My faith has sustained me through 700 years of service, and it will sustain me through however many more he requires of me. Your faith has led you into damnation, Mordecai, and it ends here. As does yours, old friend. I take no joy in this necessity, but neither will I hesitate. You represent everything that I have learned to despise. The blind loyalty, the refusal to see what is plainly before you, the weakness of clinging to hope when there is only war. Then we understand each other, and we both know what must happen next. We're due. Know this, Castor. In the moments before one of us destroys the other, I remember you as you were. I remember fighting beside you when the galaxy seemed full of promise. I remember believing that we would forge something better than the darkness from which humanity had emerged. That memory is precious to me, even corrupted as I am. Especially corrupted as I am, it is one of the few things that remains fully mine, untouched by the warp's influence. I remember too, Mordecai. I remember when you were a warrior I was proud to call brother. I will try to remember that, rather than what you have become. But I will still kill you, because duty demands it and mercy requires it. Then let us finish this. In the name of what we were and what we have become. In the name of brotherhood, betrayed and ideals that could not survive first contact with reality. In the name of the emperor you serve and the gods I have embraced. Let us end this conversation the only way it can end. In fire and blood and thunder. Brother. In fire and blood and thunder. The weapons fire almost simultaneously, both dreadnoughts having completed their targeting calculations during the exchange. The sound of their guns drowns out everything else on the battlefield. The clash of titans. When dreadnoughts duel, the opening salvo transforms the immediate area into an inferno of destruction. Castor's twin-linked las cannons fire in perfect synchronization. Two beams of ruby light lancing across the 100 meters, separating the dreadnoughts. The first beam strikes Mordecai's right shoulder, where the assault cannon is mounted. Ceramite armor designed to withstand heavy weapons. Fire simply vanishes where the las cannon beam touches it, vaporized by heat equivalent to a solar core's surface temperature. The energy bleeds through into the weapon mount itself, causing the assault cannon's ammunition feed to explode. Shells cook off in a rattling chain reaction, tearing through internal mechanisms and blowing the entire weapon assembly off the dreadnought's frame. The second las cannon beam hits center mass, impacting the corrupted ceramite plating that protects Mordecai's sarcophagus. Here the armor holds, but barely. The beam burns a crater half a meter deep into the plating, exposing the layers of different materials beneath. Adamantium mesh shows through molten ceramite, glowing white, hot before the automatic fire suppression systems flood the area with coolant. Steam erupts from the wound, obscuring Mordecai's optical sensors for precious milliseconds. But Mordecai has not been idle. His remaining weapon, a massive power fist mounted on the left arm, is already swinging up to target Castor. The fist storm bolter fires, mass reactive shells arsing across the battlefield. Several impact Castor's armor, detonating against the thick ceramite with enough force to leave craters, but failing to penetrate. Others go wild, chewing through the rubble around both dreadnoughts and forcing nearby infantry from both sides to seek cover. The bolter fire is merely suppression, a distraction to cover Mordecai's real attack. From vents in the Chaos Dreadnought's corrupted hull, warp flame erupts. This is not normal fire, but something far more terrible. Flames that burn in colors that have no names, that flicker with malevolent intelligence, that seem to reach for Castor with purpose beyond mere combustion. The flames wash over the loyalist dreadnought, and where they touch, armor begins to corrode. Not burn or melt, but corrode, rusting and pitting as centuries of entropy are compressed into seconds. The warp flame eats into seals and joints, seeking the vulnerable points where different armor plates meet, trying to find a path inward toward the sarcophagus. Castor responds by opening fire with his assault cannon. The weapon spins up with a sound like a revving chainsaw, and then shells begin to pour out at a rate of hundreds per minute. The sound is overwhelming, a continuous roar that makes the ground shake. Each shell is a mass, reactive explosive designed to punch through armor and detonate inside the target. Against infantry, the assault cannon would create a literal cloud of red mist. Against tanks, it would tear through lighter armor and shred internal systems. Against another dreadnought, especially one that has lost half its weapon systems, it becomes a devastating tool of destruction. The shells hammer into Mordecai's chassis, finding the weak points opened up by the las cannon strike. They penetrate into the weapon mount where the assault cannon used to be, detonating inside and tearing through servo motors and hydraulic lines. They impact the crater in the center mass, widening and deepening it, each explosion bringing the assault cannon's shells that much closer to the sarcophagus. Warning runes flash across Mordecai's sensory feed as system after system reports critical damage. But the Chaos Dreadnought keeps coming. The warp sustains it beyond the normal limits of machinery. Where a loyalist dreadnought would be forced to withdraw or risk catastrophic failure, Mordecai pushes forward through the storm of fire. The distance between them closes. 100 meters becomes 80, becomes 60. Castor shifts his fire, targeting the Chaos Dreadnought's legs, trying to cripple its mobility. Shells impact knee joints and ankle servos. One leg buckles slightly, but Mordecai compensates. his corrupted machine spirit adapting to the damage with speed that suggests unholy intelligence rather than mere automation. At 40 meters, Caster stops firing and begins to move, his own legs carrying him to the side in an attempt to maintain distance. But Mordecai has anticipated this. The Chaos Dreadnought's trajectory shifts, angling to intercept rather than pursue. They are both moving now, two multi-ton machines circling each other, their footfalls shaking the ground, sending up clouds of dust and pulverized rockcrete. The battlefield has become their arena, and everything else fades to insignificance as they focus entirely on each other. At 30 meters, Mordecai makes his move, despite the damage to his legs, despite the missing assault cannon and the crater in his chest armor. He surges forward in a burst of speed that seems impossible for something his size. The ground erupts beneath his feet as pistons fire at maximum output. Caster fires his last cannons again, both beams striking the approaching dreadnought. One severs what remains of the damaged assault cannon mount, sending the twisted metal spinning away. The other burns clean through one of Mordecai's leg pistons, causing the limb to lock up mid-stride. But momentum and rage carry Mordecai forward. The Chaos Dreadnought crashes into Caster with the force of a dropped building, Power Fist already swinging in a devastating arc. Caster brings up his own Power Fist to block, and the two weapons meet with an impact that generates a pressure wave strong enough to knock nearby infantry off their feet. The disruption fields surrounding both fists interact catastrophically, creating a burst of light bright enough to permanently blind anyone foolish enough to look directly at it without protection. The feedback screams through both Dreadnoughts' systems as the machine spirits struggle to compensate for the energy discharge. Locked together, the two Dreadnoughts begin to grapple. This is combat at its most primal, tons of armor and machinery straining against each other, servo motors whining as they try to overcome the strength of their opponent. Caster attempts to bring his assault cannon to bear, but Mordecai's Power Fist crashes into the weapon before he can fire, denting the rotary barrel and jamming the firing mechanism. In retaliation, Caster drives his Power Fist into the crater that his last cannons opened in Mordecai's chest. The bladed fingers of his Mark IV fist, cutting through the weakened armor and reaching the internal systems beneath. Mordecai's Vox speakers emit a sound that is not quite a scream but something worse, a grinding mechanical howl mixed with what might be agony or rage or both. He brings his Power Fist down on Caster's shoulder, where the Lascannon mounts connect to the chassis. The first blow dents the armor. The second cracks it. The third punches through, crushing the weapon mount and sending arcs of energy crackling across both Dreadnoughts as the Lascannon's power cells rupture. They are both badly damaged now. Weapons destroyed or disabled, armor breached in multiple places. A more rational assessment would suggest disengagement, withdrawal to friendly lines for repair. But rationality has fled. In its place is something older and more fundamental. Two warriors who once called each other brother, who have spent 10,000 years on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, finally getting the confrontation that history denied them. Every blow carries the weight of betrayal and loyalty, of choices made and prices paid. This is not just combat. This is catharsis through violence, the settling of accounts that have been accumulating for millennia. Caster releases his grip on Mordecai and takes a step back, creating just enough space to deliver a devastating kick to the Chaos Dreadnought's damaged leg. The piston Mordecai has been compensating for finally fails completely, and the Chaos Dreadnought staggers. Caster presses the advantage, his Power Fist crashing into the same spot again and again, each blow widening the breach in Mordecai's armor. Warning klaxons are screaming through both Dreadnoughts now. Structural integrity is compromised. Power levels are critical. Life support systems are showing stress indicators. But Mordecai is not finished. With his working arm, he reaches up and grabs Caster's Power Fist mid-strike, holding it in a grip strengthened by the warp's malevolent energies. For a moment, they are locked together again, two ancient warriors straining against each other, with every remaining bit of power their damaged frames can generate. And through it all, their Vox communications continue, though the words are now broken by static and mechanical distortion. "You should have died at Kulth," Mordecai manages, his Vox speakers barely functional. "As should you, but we are both too stubborn for that mercy," Castor responds. "This ends only one way, yes." Finally granted rest, Mordecai makes one final effort, channeling the last reserves of his corrupted power core into his power fist. The disruption field flares so bright that it's visible even through the smoke and dust. He crushes down on Castor's power fist, and Ceramite finally gives way. The fingers of Castor's power fist shatter, the weapon ruined beyond any hope of field repair. But as Mordecai executes this final attack, he leaves himself open. Castor drives his remaining functional appendage, his left leg, into Mordecai's failing support structure. The Chaos Dreadnought topples. There is a moment of almost surreal silence as the massive frame begins to fall, then the ground, shaking impact as tons of corrupted ceramite and adamantium crash into the rubble. Castor stands over his fallen opponent, his own frame barely functional, damage indicators showing red across every system. He looks down at Mordecai through failing optical sensors, and for a moment the battlefield seems to recede. Mordecai's Vox speakers crackle one final time. "Brother, I am grateful. Asa, my old friend, may you find in death the peace you were denied in life." Castor raises his damaged power fist and brings it down on Mordecai's sarcophagus with all the force his failing systems can generate. Specific battle examples and their lessons, the encounter between Castor and Mordecai, while dramatic in its particulars, represents a pattern that has been repeated countless times across the 10,000 years since the Horus heresy. Every time a loyalist force encounters Chaos, space marines who originated from the same legion, the possibility exists that dreadnoughts from both sides will meet, and when they do, the results follow predictable patterns that reveal deep truths about the nature of dreadnought warfare and the psychology of those trapped within these machines. One documented encounter occurred during the Badab War, when loyalist forces were dispatched to bring the Astral Claws chapter back into compliance. The Astral Claws had dreadnoughts in their arsenal, ancient warriors who had served the chapter with distinction for centuries. When the chapter turned renegade and was eventually corrupted by Chaos, these dreadnoughts faced impossible choices. Some remained loyal to the Emperor despite their chapter's fall, fighting against their own brothers in desperate attempts to preserve what honor they could. Others followed their chapter into damnation, their long service twisted into justification for betrayal. During the invasion of Perios, a critical battle in the Badab War, Brother Vorul, a siege dreadnought of the Astral Claws, found himself facing off against a loyalist dreadnought from the Marines' errant chapter. The engagement was textbook dreadnought combat, both machines using their superior firepower and durability to anchor their respective battle lines. But the Vox transmissions between them, preserved in after-action reports, reveal the personal dimension of the conflict. Vorul spoke of betrayal by the Imperium, of being left to die by high lords who cared nothing for the warriors who bled for them. The Marines' errant dreadnought responded with condemnations of treachery and fall from duty. Both were destroyed in the engagement, their sarcophagi recovered by their respective sides, and their pilots given the final rest they had been seeking for centuries. Another documented encounter occurred during the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler. The Chaos forces included several word-bearers dreadnoughts, ancient machines that had been present at Kulth during the opening moves of the Horus heresy. The Loyalist defense included Ultramarines dreadnoughts, some of whom had also fought at Kulth on the opposite side. When these dreadnoughts met in the ruins of Cadia itself, the resulting combat was savage beyond measure. Both sides fought with a fury that suggested this was personal, that the tactical situation mattered less than the opportunity to finally settle accounts that had been accumulating for 10 millennia. The Ultramarines dreadnought, ancient Galatan, had been at Kulth as a fresh sergeant. He had witnessed firsthand the word-bearer's betrayal, had seen brothers he had trained with cut down by those they had thought were allies. His internment in a dreadnought came shortly after, the result of wounds sustained during the desperate defense of the archaeology cities. The word-bearer's dreadnought, Apostle Ketharis, had been a chaplain during the heresy, one of those who had spread the faith in the dark gods among the legion's ranks. He viewed the betrayal at Kolth not as treachery, but as righteous vengeance against those who had suppressed the truth. Their duel lasted for nearly 4 hours, an almost unheard of length for dreadnought combat. Both machines were extensively damaged within the first minutes, but neither would yield. They circled each other through the ruins, firing when opportunity presented, closing for melee when ammunition ran low, breaking apart when damage became too severe, and then engaging again as soon as repairs could be effected. The surrounding forces on both sides learned to give them space, creating a bubble in the battle where only the two dreadnoughts fought, as if even the fury of the 13th Black Crusade recognized that this was something that required resolution. The engagement ended when orbital bombardment from a Chaos cruiser forced both sides to withdraw. Galatan survived, though his chassis required months of repair. Ketharis was never seen again, and whether he was destroyed in the bombardment or simply retreated into the Eye of Terror remains unknown. But the Vox recordings from their duel reveal the depth of emotion that can exist even in warriors who have been reduced to consciousness in machines. They spoke of Kolth constantly, returning to it again and again as the source of their mutual hatred. They invoked specific moments, specific brothers who had fallen, specific betrayals and counter-betrayals. It was clear that both had spent 10,000 years dwelling on that single day, that the memory of it had burned through everything else they might have remembered, becoming the central organizing principle of their existence. These encounters reveal several consistent patterns. First, when dreadnoughts from enemy legions, who once fought together, meet, there is almost always a moment of recognition and communication before combat begins. The pilots seem compelled to acknowledge what they once were to each other, even when they know it will change nothing about the outcome. Second, the combat itself is unusually prolonged and savage compared to normal dreadnought engagements. These machines seem to push themselves beyond normal operational limits, their pilots driving damaged systems past failure points in their determination to destroy their former brothers. Third, there is often an element of mercy in the final blow. The winning dreadnought does not simply disable its opponent and leave it for capture or slow death. It delivers a killing strike to the sarcophagus, ensuring that the defeated pilot is finally granted the death that was denied them upon interment. This pattern suggests that despite millennia of enmity, despite the absolute nature of their ideological divide, some part of the pilots still remembers what it was to be brothers. They show each other a kindness they would not extend to other enemies, the mercy of a clean death rather than continued suffering. The aftermath. When the thunder fades, the immediate aftermath of a dreadnought duel is always chaotic. The surrounding battlefield, which often cleared during the engagement as both sides recognized what was happening, floods back in as soon as one combatant falls. If the surviving dreadnought belongs to your side, you rush forward to assess damage and provide support. If it belongs to the enemy, you focus fire in an attempt to finish what the duel began. The disabled or destroyed dreadnought becomes a focal point for recovery efforts. For loyalist forces, securing the sarcophagus of a fallen dreadnought is a matter of sacred duty. These armored coffins contain not just valuable seed but the remains of a hero whose service stretched across centuries. Even if the pilot is dead, even if the chassis is damaged beyond repair, the sarcophagus itself must be recovered and returned to the chapter for proper burial rites. For Chaos forces, the calculation is different. A destroyed dreadnought represents lost combat capability, but more than that, it represents an opportunity. If the victorious Chaos forces can capture the loyalist sarcophagus, they gain access to seed and potentially to a prisoner whose torment can stretch across years or centuries. Conversely, loyalist forces that secure a destroyed Chaos dreadnought face difficult decisions about what to do with the corrupted remains. the sarcophagus cannot simply be opened, as the warp corruption that permeates the Chaos pilot might spread to anyone who comes in contact with it. The safest option is often to seal the entire assembly in blessed containers and deliver it to the Inquisition for study or destruction. But the physical aftermath, dramatic as it is, pales in comparison to the psychological impact on the surviving pilot. When a dreadnought destroys an enemy from a legion that once was brother, when that enemy was perhaps someone they knew personally before the heresy, the weight of that act settles on the pilot's consciousness in ways that cannot be easily dismissed. For loyalist pilots, there is often a complex mix of emotions: relief that a traitor has been destroyed, satisfaction that duty has been done, but also, if they are honest with themselves, grief at the necessity. They have killed something that was once part of what they were, destroyed a connection to a past that grows dimmer with each passing century. Castor's experience after destroying Mordecai exemplifies this complexity. As Tech Marines worked to repair his damaged chassis and prepare him for return to stasis, Castor found himself reviewing the engagement again and again in his memory banks. He could see every moment of the fight, every word exchanged, every blow struck. But what haunted him was not the combat itself, but the recognition in Mordecai's voice when they first spoke. That moment of connection, of shared history, of remembering what they had been before the galaxy burned. Castor had spent 700 years as a dreadnought, and in that time he had killed hundreds, perhaps thousands of enemies, but none of those deaths carried the same weight as Mordecai's. The Ultramarines who recovered Castor noted in their reports that the Ancient seemed unusually withdrawn during the days before he was returned to stasis. His Vox transmissions were terse, focused entirely on tactical matters, with none of the occasional reminiscences that usually characterized his interactions with the chapter. When asked directly about the engagement with the word-bearer's dreadnought, Castor's response was simple: it was necessary. It was duty. And it was the end of something that died 10,000 years ago, but refused to acknowledge its death until now. For Chaos Dreadnought pilots who survive such encounters, the aftermath is filtered through layers of corruption and madness that make their emotional responses difficult to pass. A Chaos pilot might experience what appears to be grief, but that emotion is twisted by the warp into rage or bitter satisfaction, or simply an intensification of the hatred that drives them. The destruction of a former brother might be celebrated as a victory or mourned as the loss of the last connection to a past they can barely remember. The coherence of the emotional response depends heavily on how far the pilot has descended into madness and corruption. For pilots who have maintained some measure of sanity, destroying a former brother can actually provide a strange form of closure. The traitor contemptor Dreadnought Carthax, who fought at the Battle of Macragge during the First Tyrannic War, encountered and destroyed a loyalist dreadnought who had served in the same company before the heresy. After the battle, Carthax was heard transmitting to himself over closed Vox channels, reviewing the engagement in detail. The transmission was later recovered and analyzed by inquisitorial authorities. It revealed that Carthax viewed the encounter not as a tragedy, but as a completion, as the final settling of an account that had been left open for 10,000 years. "Now we are balanced," the transmission recorded him saying. "Now the debt is paid. We betrayed each other, he in choosing the corpse god, and I in choosing the truth of chaos. And now one of us has paid with final death. The scales are even, and I am free of that particular ghost." This suggests that for some Chaos Dreadnought pilots, the destruction of former brothers might actually reduce the psychological burden they carry rather than increasing it. These pilots have spent millennia justifying their choices, building elaborate rationalizations for why their betrayal was necessary and right. When they encounter and destroy a former brother, it provides validation for those rationalizations. They can point to the combat as proof that their former brothers truly were enemies, that reconciliation was never possible, that the paths they chose inevitably led to this violent resolution. For the chapters and legions that these dreadnoughts serve, The duels between former brothers carry implications that extend beyond the individual pilots. When word spreads through a chapter that one of their ancients destroyed a Chaos Dreadnought, who once served in the same legion before the heresy, it serves as a powerful reminder of the heresy's legacy. The younger Space Marines, those who were recruited centuries or millennia after the schism, sometimes struggle to fully comprehend the personal dimensions of that great betrayal. They know the history, they understand the strategic and theological divisions, but they have never known anyone who turned traitor. The Dreadnought duels make it real for them, transforming abstract historical knowledge into something immediate and personal. Conclusion: eternal war and the weight of memory. There is a moment that comes to every Dreadnought pilot, usually late in their existence, when the organic components of their brain have degraded to the point where memory has become unreliable and the distinction between past and present has blurred. In this moment, the pilot becomes aware that they can no longer fully remember what it felt like to be human. They know intellectually that they once had a body of flesh and blood, that they once experienced sensations without the intermediary of sensors and data feeds, that they once formed emotional connections to people and places. But the visceral reality of those experiences has faded, replaced by archived data that lacks the emotional context that makes memories truly meaningful. For pilots who have destroyed former brothers from the same legion, this fading creates a particular kind of pain. As the memory of the encounter dims, as the faces and voices of the defeated grow indistinct, there is a fear that the significance of the act will be lost, that the weight of killing someone they once called brother will become just another entry in a long list of tactical engagements, that the personal dimension will vanish, leaving only the cold fact of destruction without the context of betrayal and tragedy and shared history that made it meaningful. This fear drives many ancient dreadnoughts to obsessive review of certain memories, going over them again and again in an attempt to keep them fresh. For Castor, the encounter with Mordecai became one of these anchoring memories, a point of reference that helped him maintain his sense of identity, even as other memories faded. In the centuries after that battle, when he awakened and struggled to remember who and when he would often begin by recalling the duel. The details had become formulaic through repetition, stripped of most of their emotional content, but they served as a reminder that he was Castor, that he had been a sergeant during the Great Crusade, that he had witnessed the heresy and survived it, and continued to serve despite all the changes the millennia had brought. But even these anchoring memories eventually fade. The organic brain can only maintain coherent information for so long. As neurons die and synaptic connections weaken, even the most carefully maintained memories begin to degrade. The faces become shadows, the voices become whispers. The emotional weight diminishes until what remains is merely knowledge without feeling. This is the final horror of Dreadnought existence. Not that they will eventually lose their memories, but that they will lose them slowly enough to watch it happen, to feel each piece slip away, to know what is being lost even as they lack the capacity to prevent the loss. For the Imperium as a whole, the duels between dreadnoughts from former brother legions serve as microcosms of the larger tragedy of the Horus heresy. The galaxy, spanning civil war that tore humanity apart 10,000 years ago, is still being fought in these personal encounters between warriors who knew each other before the schism. Every time two such dreadnoughts meet and destroy each other, it is both a settling of old accounts and a perpetuation of the cycle of violence that has defined the Imperium since its founding. There is no healing from these wounds. There is no reconciliation. There is only eternal war, fought by warriors who cannot die, over differences that will never be resolved. Yet there is also a strange beauty in the dedication these dreadnought pilots show to their chosen paths. The loyalists who fight despite the slow erosion of their humanity, who maintain their duty across centuries or millennia of service, who refuse to let corruption or madness claim them, even as they watch everything they once knew fade into history. The traitors who embrace their damnation, who find meaning in their suffering, who rage against the machine of their existence while being trapped irreversibly within it. Both represent a commitment to ideals that transcends the limitations of flesh and the normal human span of existence. They are the ultimate expression of what it means to be a space marine, warriors who serve beyond death because they believe in something greater than their own survival. When two such beings meet and fight, when they acknowledge what they once were to each other before delivering death with weapons that could shatter tanks, they are engaging in a ritual that defines the 41st millennium. This is a galaxy where there is only war, where the past cannot be escaped, and the future offers only more of the same. Where the greatest heroes are those who endure suffering that would break ordinary humans without allowing that suffering to destroy what they believe in. The Dreadnought duels are the purest expression of this grim reality. Two warriors who refused to die when their bodies failed, who continued fighting when sanity demanded they seek peace, who maintained their hatred or their loyalty across spans of time that make individual human lives seem like heartbeats, finally meeting to settle accounts in the only way their existence allows. For those who witness these duels, the lesson is clear. Duty does not end with death. Sacrifice is eternal. The war will continue as long as there are warriors willing to fight it. And some warriors are trapped in a state where they cannot stop fighting, no matter how much they might wish to. This is the horror and the glory of Warhammer 40,000, distilled into the image of two towering war machines locked in mortal combat while their pilots, reduced to scraps of flesh and fading memories, pour out millennia of accumulated grief and rage and loss through weapons that were never meant to be wielded against brothers. And when the battle ends, when one dreadnought stands over the broken remains of the other, when the victor delivers the final blow that shatters the sarcophagus and grants the defeated the mercy of true death, there is no triumph, no sense of victory or vindication. Only the knowledge that one more connection to the past has been severed, one more fragment of the Great Crusade's dream has been reduced to scrap metal and cooling ceramite. One more chapter in an endless story of war and betrayal has been written and closed. The surviving dreadnought will be repaired and returned to stasis, to sleep away the decades or centuries until they are needed again. And when they wake, they will carry the memory of what they did, adding it to the weight of all the battles they have fought and all the brothers they have killed across spans of time that dwarf human comprehension. They will continue to serve because that is what they were created to do. They will fight because fighting is all they have left. And someday, perhaps, they will meet another dreadnought from an enemy legion who remembers the time before the schism, and the cycle will repeat, and more debts will be settled in fire and blood and thunder. This is the fate of those who cannot die in a universe that offers no peace. This is the burden carried by warriors too valuable to lose and too damaged to save. This is what happens when two dreadnoughts from enemy legions meet on the battlefield of the 41st millennium. Consider the full scope of this tragedy. These pilots were once among the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. They were selected from millions to become space marines, undergoing transformations that elevated them far beyond normal human capabilities. They fought through the Great Crusade, witnessing the birth of the Imperium and believing they were building something that would last forever. When they were mortally wounded, their gene seed was too valuable to lose, their skills too refined to waste. So they were given a choice that was not truly a choice: accept interment in a dreadnought and continue serving, or die and be forgotten. Most chose service. How could they not? To be a space marine is to know no higher calling than duty. To serve the Emperor and protect humanity is not just a job but an identity, a purpose that defines every aspect of existence. The thought of letting that purpose end, simply because flesh failed, seemed like the ultimate betrayal of everything they had become. So they accepted the sarcophagus, accepted the neural interfaces, accepted the slow transformation from warrior to weapon. They did not know, could not know, what that acceptance would cost them over the centuries and millennia that followed. They did not know that they would watch everyone they cared about grow old and die, while they remained frozen in time. They did not know that each awakening would be a disorienting shock of temporal displacement, that they would lose track of decades or centuries in the blink of an eye. They did not know that their memories would fade despite their transhuman brains, that faces would become blurs and voices would become whispers, and emotions would become distant echoes of something they once understood. They did not know that they would eventually forget what it felt like to be human, that they would become living museums of a past they could no longer fully recall. And they certainly did not know that some of their brothers would turn traitor, that the Imperium would be torn apart by civil war, that they would be forced to kill warriors they had once fought beside, that the bonds of brotherhood they thought unbreakable would shatter completely, leaving them to face former comrades across battlefields soaked in blood and lit by burning worlds. That victory and survival would mean watching people they once called friends destroyed by their own hands, their sarcophagi breached, their organic remains finally released into death after centuries or millennia of service to causes that could not be reconciled. This is the true horror at the heart of the Dreadnoughts' existence, not the loss of body or sensation, not even the slow erosion of memory and humanity. It is the knowledge that duty requires them to destroy everything that once gave that duty meaning. They serve to protect the Emperor's Imperium, but the Imperium they knew is dead, replaced by something darker and more desperate. They fight to preserve humanity, but they themselves have become something that humanity would struggle to recognize as human. They kill their enemies to defend their brothers, but sometimes those enemies are the very brothers they once swore to defend. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and for those entombed in walking sarcophagi of blessed ceramite and ancient technology, that war is truly eternal. There is no retirement, no peaceful end to their service. There is only battle and sleep and awakening to more battle, stretching forward across time until either the sarcophagus is destroyed or the organic components within finally fail beyond all ability to sustain consciousness. And even then, even in death, they will not rest easy. They will join the honored dead, their names carved in stone and spoken in ceremonies, remembered as heroes who gave everything in service to the Emperor. But they will also be forgotten, eventually. Time is too vast, and the galaxy moves on. New heroes emerge. New battles are fought. New crises demand attention. The ancient dreadnoughts who served and sacrificed and endured become historical footnotes, then legends, then myths. And finally, they vanish entirely from living memory. Only the machines remain, standing in silent halls, waiting for the next awakening that may never come. This is what happens when two dreadnoughts from enemy legions meet. They are not just fighting for territory or tactical advantage. They are fighting because the alternative is to acknowledge that their sacrifices might have been for nothing, that the brotherhood they once cherished is dead beyond all hope of resurrection, that everything they suffered and endured has led only to this moment of mutual destruction. So they fight and they die. And their stories join the countless others that mark the long decline of the Imperium from its golden age into its current state of barely sustained survival. And somewhere, in a fortress monastery or a daemon world, another dreadnought will awaken. It will ask how long it has slept. It will struggle to remember where and when it is. It will recall fragments of battles fought centuries ago and wonder if the brothers who fought beside it still live. And it will march to war once more, because that is what it was made to do, because duty demands it, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no other choice. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and for those entombed in walking sarcophagi of blessed ceramite and ancient technology, that war is truly eternal. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the tragic encounters between dreadnoughts from enemy legions, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of Warhammer 40k lore. The universe of the 41st Millennium contains countless stories of sacrifice, duty, and horror, and will continue bringing you the most detailed examinations of what it means to exist in that grim darkness. Until next time, may the Emperor protect.